Welcome to this session, which is incredibly timely, and you never know, we might solve the issue in the next hour. You never know, it is possible. The idea of a cultural remix is foundational in culture, really, isn't it? If you think back to, I don't know, the first person coming up with a drum beat in prehistoric times, and then someone else hears it and comes up with a new drum beat based on that first one, and then you go forward years and you've got the Beatles come from that, essentially, and then you've got modern music, or the same in film or theatre or whatever else. And when we get to AI, though, things really change. Everything up to now, there's been ways through it, even sampling in the music world, which came along 45 years ago and was a huge headache for people. They found ways of clearing those samples. There's a legal framework for it now. With AI, can we do that when AI models are sucking in all this stuff? We don't necessarily know what it's sucking in. We don't necessarily know what it's spitting out, in what order, who could get paid for it. It's a mess. But are there opportunities? Well, we've got a fantastic panel here to unpick all of this today, and we will talk to them all very shortly. We've got Gadney from Charismatic.ai. We have Rishi Coupland from the BFI and CoStar Foresight Lab. We have Jocelyn Burnham, who is an independent consultant in the AI world. And we have Nuala Polo from the Ada Lovelace Institute. So we will talk to you very shortly. But first of all, I want to come to you. I want to come to the audience. I want to come to the audience because we have a situation now where there's this whole government consultation. We don't know how that's going to go in terms of how UK law will respect AI, how it will respect creatives, more importantly. How will this go? So I want to get a feel for how you feel about how regulation around AI should go. I'm going to give you 3 options, and I'm going to give you them all now, and then I'll go through them again. You can stick your hand up for which one you agree with, because if I just ask you to stick your hand up, you'll stick your hand up for the first one, and then you'll stick your hand up for the second one when you change your mind. So, it is either training on my work without permission is fine if I can opt out, or only explicit opt-in is acceptable, or it depends on pay, transparency, and control. So, 3 different viewpoints there. So, please, we'll see at the end if anyone's changed their mind on this one. Put your hand up if you think that training on my work without permission is fine if I can opt out. The lobbyists of the AI industry will love that one, or not. Only explicit opt-in is acceptable. Lots of hands for that one. And the slightly more nuanced one, it depends on pay, transparency, and control. A few for that as well. So let's see how things go as we go through the conversation today. Let's talk to you first, Guy. Tell us a bit about, we've got 2 minutes each for these, so let's keep punchy with these quick intros to what you're doing. So tell us about how Charismatic AI works with licensed IP, and why licensing and collaboration is feasible at scale.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, 2 minutes is a bit tough, but I'll see what I can do. So Charismatic.ai I set up about 3 years ago in a consortium with Channel 4, Aardman Animations, Falmouth University, Creative Computing Institute at University of Arts London. And it started off as an Innovate UK-funded project, thanks to them. And we finished that in about March, April this year. And in essence, what we wanted to provoke, literally in the initial piece, was forgetting about video and audio, music. Let's go back to the core of the creative process and story generation to begin with. The provocation was, how little do you need to give a system to generate something which is a coherent script or narrative? In other words, it could be a murder mystery thriller set in MediaCity in Salford Keys. If I just put that in, am I going to get something that has compelling characters, consistency, and everything? And that's what we set out to research, and we did it with workshops with Channel 4, and then we built the system. The system is now running, so we're launching it properly this week and then next week in London at Content London. And you know, along the way, we had a full-time digital ethicist who was consequence scanning around a lot of the points you're raising there around copyright and so forth. I started talking about copyright in the creative industries in 2018. I've been tracking it for that long period, and I've been putting my hand up going, guys, something's not right here. So we have been, you know, really down in the weeds on it. And I think those of you who answered the third question is interesting, because actually the word that sticks out of that one is control. Because actually, as a creator, you probably don't have control anyway. It's probably your publisher, your music label, your film distributor, whatever. Those are the guys doing the deals at the moment. So when it's a deal with the music creator, it's Warner Brothers who are doing the deal, not you as an artist. So that's challenging. We license content. We also use, you know, the major large language models, because guess what? In this country, we don't have a sovereign large language model, which we need. So we're pioneering things. Yeah, we're getting in trouble along the way, but we're learning shed loads. And I'll talk a little bit also about the new courses, Gen AI courses that we're launching, because we want everyone else to know what we've seen and what we've experienced. So I hope that was roughly 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Jocelyn, so you are a consultant working in the AI intersection with the creative industries. Tell us about what people in your workshops are excited about, what they're angry about. What's the tone of people's opinions here?
Sure, and just to say, my whole thing is I'm ideologically neutral about AI. So I always say that I support organisations and individuals if they're into it, experimenting, or if they despise it, want to represent their interests, wherever they are. My whole thing is building agency and getting people into it. Within that, I work with organisations like the Tape, Shakespeare's Globe, Museum of Prague, quite a bit with the Open University recently, and some of that's artist residencies, some of that is with people working sort of in the institutions of culture as well, and what kind of policies come out of that, what ways of working are they comfortable with. So I do a lot of hands-on stuff where we experiment with the tech, partly to try and break it, to criticize it, to see what it inspires, see what individuals want to take further. Perhaps they want to build with it, perhaps they don't, but understanding it is sort of the first step to even developing a perspective on it. As far as what people are kind of thinking and feeling with what we experiment with, I mean, when it comes to generative image, I haven't had many people be excited about that with the work that I'm doing. You can probably understand why. There's a great deal of pain that comes up. I've had people cry when they've seen some of the things which are being produced. Same with video as well. I haven't yet seen someone report to me that they've really enjoyed watching a piece of AI video, or they feel excited to work with it. That's just reporting, I'm trying to be neutral. That said, there are areas that I am seeing people get into. I talked yesterday at the Fringe thing about working with artists who are using AI for coding, sort of vibe coding, you'd call it, where we're seeing actually can you make an experience in an hour using some of these tools that reflects part of your practice, reflects part of your perspective. That I'm seeing people really pick up and run with, because for the first time a lot of creatives who haven't worked with code are realizing how far they can get, and I think this is the first year where we're seeing some of that work begin to reach a really exciting place. So I would say overall I see a lot of pain, actually. I see a lot of anger and frustration. Somebody said to me in a workshop, it feels a bit like we're being robbed in a language we don't understand, and we can't go to the police because they speak a different language. And I thought that really kind of resonated for me as well. So again, ideologically neutral, but I'm going to try and reflect honestly what I have been seeing and working with.
Brilliant. My feelings about AI were very early, set early with ChatGPT when I asked it about what it knew about me, and it said I died in 2016 of a heart attack. It even wrote a lovely obituary of me. It's sorted it out now, but that was quite a striking moment for me. Nuala, so let's take a look at this from a policy perspective then. Where is the UK AI copyright debate now, and what does good governance look like?
Yeah, thanks. So just to give a bit of context, I'm here from the Ada Lovelace Institute, and we're a research institute focused on thinking about how we can make data and AI work for people and society. And I'm our policy lead, so speaking about kind of what's been happening in the policy space, I'm just going to focus on the last year because I only have 2 minutes and it's been moving pretty quickly. But in February of last year, the UK government launched its consultation on AI and copyright, kind of admitting that the current framework wasn't working either for rights holders or for AI developers. And they put forward a few different options. There was kind of one, I would say, like for rights holders, which was about strengthening copyright and requiring licensing in all cases. That would be an opt-in. One that I would say was positioned for developers, which was a broad text and data mining exemption, where this would allow data mining on copyrighted works without any rights holder permissions. And then there was this third kind of compromise option, this is how it was presented, which was a text and data mining exemption, which would entail rights holders being able to reserve their rights by opting out. And this would be done using a machine-readable format. There were a few kind of major risks with this approach. I would say the first was that it relied on this machine-readable format, which currently doesn't exist in any effective way. There's no established machine-readable methods for rights holders to reserve their rights, so it's kind of predicated on this technological method, which isn't in existence right now. And secondly, it puts virtually an impossible onus on rights holders to search for where their works might be misused and proactively opt out of that. So there was a big backlash kind of to that proposal. We saw from creative industries, there was the Make It Fair campaign, which got a lot of attention in the UK. And then following that, last spring, we saw the passage of the Data Use and Access Bill at the time. There was a lot of kind of attention to this bill on the issue of copyright, when the House of Lords proposed an amendment to improve the position of copyright holders and require increased transparency from developers. The bill went back and forth between the House of Lords and the House of Commons many times in ping pong, but ultimately the amendment was rejected by the House of Commons, who said that the government was still considering the consultation responses, and there was kind of ongoing litigation that needed to be, we needed to wait to find out how that would turn out. So in June 2025, the Data Use and Access Act was passed, but without kind of copyright considerations, which were parked. The government kind of said, you know, we will deal with these, not in the Data Use and Access Act. So where are we now? We have ongoing government working groups with DCIT on kind of copyright and AI, with industry, with some creative rights holders, and these are in an attempt to co-design potential solutions. These are ongoing. And the government also committed to, within 9 months of the Data Use and Access Act, publishing a report on the use of copyrighted works in the development of AI, and publishing an economic impact assessment, looking at what the different economic impacts would be both on rights holders and AI developers for each of the options laid out in the consultation. So we're kind of waiting for those, but I would say, you know, economic impacts aren't the only impacts that I think we need to be concerned about.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Rishi, obviously the big problem here is, the big worry here is that AI content, or one of the big worries is that AI content will come in and be used in place of human-generated content. From what you're seeing, is this a real risk? Is this a real risk today, or is it more hype and worry?
Thank you. Well, just before I start, I'll follow your good example and just qualify a little bit where I stand and where I'm coming from. So, the British Film Institute, we're the lead body in the UK for film, TV, video games, and immersive. So everything I'm saying comes from that perspective, and I say that because I've sat on panels with, for example, people from the fashion sector who have tended to have a slightly different perspective on things, which is fine. Music's different, again, publishing very different, but all really valid. But I can speak from my perspective, I guess, and I think to your question of is it substitute today, is it real risk or is it hype? I mean, it's okay to say both, I think. And what do I mean by both? Well, there is so much uncertainty, actually, that it's actually repressing usage that could be interesting of AI, I think, in the sector. And I completely understand why people are reticent to use it. I think we have really interesting situations where some rights holders who might want to license and use AI also have litigation with AI, but also using third parties to with workflows that might use AI, but they don't want to use AI unless it's on private silicon, and so it's a complete kind of jamboree and mix. Why can I say it's both hype and both a risk? I think because right now all those barriers mean that so much of the use is experimental. And we talk about this kind of flywheel of experimentation in the BFI report we launched, BFI CoStar, report we launched in May. So you could just kind of take it easy and say that, well, we're waiting for legislation, but in actual fact, lots is happening with the legislation right now. Those discussions, they're really crucial and critical. And a lot is happening actually as well behind the scenes in terms of things that are being built right now. So sovereign AI models are being built and developed super fast, and they're building moats around themselves, or trying to, in other countries, for example, as Guy pointed out. The Creative Content Exchange is an R&D initiative from the government which is being developed. So I think that there are real risks in just standing off and not engaging with this, and Jocelyn kind of said maybe you have to be ideologically neutral in order to try and engage with it, because otherwise you get, if you take a position that's too strong too early, you kind of forbid yourself from experimenting. So I think actually it's a bit of both.
Interesting, okay. Well, I'll stick with you, Rishi, in terms of kind of building on what you said there, and I'm going to ask all of you this, around what is the solution then, from your point of view, your kind of gut thought here, from a legally and ethically, where is the line between kind of fair reference and industrial theft of content? In your mind, what are your thoughts there?
I think if we go very quickly towards some kind of open access, and other people have said it better than me, the actual wording of the option, you described it quite formally, I think, and correctly. But if we go too quickly, here's some things I think might bear consideration. The first is that actually we've built, I know economics isn't the only argument, but we've built actually a very strong economic argument why the creative industry should be considered a creative industry, as well as having social impacts as well. And actually, there's a danger that you undermine that. The other consideration I think that follows on from that is that if you let's say we go to opt-out or we go to open access, I mean, where's the valuation come into this? I think it's a really technical point, but you're kind of basically saying that there isn't any, you're giving up the ghost on saying that you can value these things and therefore have deals in place that would allow market-based, technical and sophisticated approaches to doing deals based on that market valuation. And I think doing that right now is dangerous, because I'll give you two kind of pulpit positions you could take. Number one, throughout history, creative content has been sort of remixed. People look at it and you come up with new versions of it, and the new versions are interesting, etc., etc. And so it's just part of that. And ever since we've done that, that hasn't undermined what we do. The second one is AI is different actually, and there's a host of investment that's gone into it. Is it right that none of that investment goes towards making market deals based on a protection of through copyright of creative content? And actually, are we missing something here? Is it possible that a lot of the AI model owners actually secretly feel they haven't cracked creativity, really, deep down? They're very keen to do it. And actually the content that's produced, which is full of human nuance, from all people around us, the creative industry around us, is actually very valuable. And the answer is, I don't know. We don't know either of those two things. So are we right to kind of undermine the situation we've got while we don't know the answer to those two things?
Yeah, it's interesting when you see AI pop up in a broader sense of things. So, for example, the new Call of Duty game that came out recently has these little generative AI created pieces of artwork in it. It's not a game I've played, but some of the response to it instantly was like, whoa! And this was from fans of the game. They were like, whoa! So it's interesting to see how, yeah, you say they haven't cracked creativity. Yeah, it's an interesting point. Guy, you're at the forefront of this, in terms of, you're kind of at the front line of this. From a legal and ethical point of view, where is the line, do you think?
The line is like a border in a complex European country. There is no line. There's no clarity in the UK. And even if we did get clarity in the UK, the US is going to have a huge influence on whatever clarity means in the UK. Hypothesize that we have this brilliant clouds parting, the sun comes out, and we suddenly go, this is how we're going to move forward. There will be a conversation with the UK Prime Minister and Donald Trump during his term about whether or not they accept that, because the trade deals that need to be done are going to be influenced by those organisations, because in essence we are taking a position which may be quite aggressive over an international tech company. And to that point, Lee talked about AI developers, and sometimes people talk, I'm an AI developer, I'm a very creative company. We have about 7 or 8 people in us. I'm not big tech. There's this confluence of things about AI developers and big tech. They're completely different sectors. And by the way, we were not consulted at all on those first consultations. We are now, which is really nice, but we're the people who are trying to champion these and bridge the 2 industries. So where is the line? The line, I think, and Rishi was sort of alluding to it, in this, we've had a period at the moment of uncertainty. We're still in a period of uncertainty. You have 2 options. Wait or do something. Do something, please. Because if you wait, everyone else is doing something. The other countries around the world are doing things. We just came back from a brilliant British Council mission to Turkey. Baltic states are doing brilliant stuff. Turkey's doing incredible stuff. The US is striving ahead. If we wait, it's like the race is already happening in the athletics track and we're not even walking into the stadium. That's bad for the creative industries. It's really bad. And we need to make sure that in this, it's the creators themselves, whether you're in the room or not, but it's the creators who are represented, because also the one thing that is going to happen is it's going to change massively. Complete reorganization of the way and the scale and the globalization of what creativity is, like how we tell a story, what format that is. That's exciting. So part of what we did, and we've launched this website, cineprolab.com. Please go there, please have a look. 47 courses for filmmakers on how to learn generative AI. The reason we did Cine ProLab was because you can't make a decision whether to wait or do something from a position of not knowing anything. Have to know something. The tools are out there. Get to know them and then have a position. And all of us, I think, are talking about the emotion in this, from everything that we've seen. I've long seen this as individuals and as collectively as groups or organizations or nations. It's like the 5 stages of grief. There's the anger, there's the denial, there's the upsetness. So it's never going to happen. I had a showrunner talk to me on a podcast I was doing about 2 years ago saying, I will put a gun to my head and pull the trigger before I use AI. Just think about that statement. He was furious and I hadn't even said anything yet. It's like, to have that visceral ending your life statement and mean it over something that actually doesn't exist yet is this sort of very emotional reaction. So let's get through that, understand the position, and then we can start to come to it. Please don't wait for policy.
Okay. Jocelyn, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, maybe just a small thought on ethics and technical development. We're sort of making this assumption that the only way these tools can move forwards is by mass breach of copyright. That just is the norm. We also know that isn't true. I don't have a financial relationship with them, but I would point to Adobe as doing really good work in this space with their Firefly model entirely built just on copyright that they own or have license to use. You can build very powerful AI tech within current legal and respectful frameworks too. I would contrast that perhaps with, I don't know how many people here remember in the summer there was a bit of a viral meme of remaking Studio Ghibli style images. Yeah, everyone nods. In sort of, memes were being recreated into Studio Ghibli style images. And this started with OpenAI. And then Sam Altman himself, the CEO of OpenAI, changed his avatar to a Studio Ghibli style version of himself. And, artists aren't naive. They can see this normalization happening. They can see that this isn't a positive two-way relationship. This is domination. This is showing I can change this because I can. I can rechange my avatar to show how normal this is now. When we talk about collaborating with artists, well, I always think, is this collaboration or are we just showing, no, we've won this, and almost taunting? And I think actually that did a lot of damage for the idea that there is this positive back and forth relationship. The last thing I would also touch on is this is a little bit more blurry, but it's this idea that creatives should get AI literate, that AI literacy is the thing that will help them step forward. And I'm always curious where the AI literacy is being defined, whether it's being defined as you're AI literate if you can use certain commercial products, and of course that company is the one funding the AI literacy. There's lots of this sense of who owns the idea that you understand AI and who does that benefit. And I think also, artists are realizing that too. So I think ethically, to move a step forwards, perhaps genuine respect between the tech companies and artists, and invitations to take their views a bit more seriously.
Okay, yeah, there's definitely something of the Silicon Valley playbook here in how the AI is being pushed out. You just have to look at Uber, how Uber transformed the taxi industry. They just went out and did it, and then they got sued. They lobbied, they did whatever they could to get their way, and now I think a lot of people would default to using Uber to get a taxi, and so it's totally the same with this. So people like OpenAI are like, it's just the playbook. It's just push on through, bulldozer everything out of the way, and yeah, it doesn't have to be like that. Nuala, your thoughts on this line?
Yeah, I agree that there's not kind of this very clear, hard and fast line, but I think two of the factors that kind of move us from this right to remix to extraction are around scale and consent. I think some of the panelists mentioned, like, we've seen examples of models that have been trained on all legally acquired data, and I think it's helpful to make a distinction here between narrower models, which can still be generative, versus general purpose AI models. So narrower models typically are trained on more curated data sets to support like a particular function, but a lot of the lobbyists that we're seeing around copyright are general purpose AI developers, so that's OpenAI, Meta, Google, etc. And for general purpose AI, because these models are trying to do as much as possible, this requires a vast volume of data, and these developers are kind of doing as much as they can to get as much information as they can to feed the models. And I know that today is really about copyright, but I think I just wanted to kind of broaden this out a bit to say that while we're talking about copyright today, this is part of a wider trend for kind of amassing as much data as these developers can at any cost. So in the EU right now, we're seeing efforts to simplify GDPR, to change the definition of personal data, to more easily have access to personal data to train AI models. We've seen big companies build partnerships with the NHS to try to access public health data sets. And we've seen a lot of these companies build tools for data-rich environments like wearables and smart home devices, which are really picking up information about the environment and about the person wearing them. So there is this real process of extraction, particularly for general purpose AI, not necessarily generative AI. And that's being framed in terms of trade-offs. So, we have to give this data over because these systems are going to boost the economy, they're going to change our lives. And I think there are lots of models that might be able to do this, but the general purpose models with the developers that really have the strong lobby here, we don't have a lot of evidence on the kind of efficacy and productivity and economic gains that were being promised. We've seen a few studies come out showing there's not a lot of evidence on return on investment or productivity gains. So I think just really important in this conversation about extraction, this is happening in copyright, but this is part of a wider trend to just like extract as much data as we can. And right now we don't have a lot of great evidence for general purpose AI, at least, as to kind of what we're getting in return.
Okay, I'll stick with you, Nuala, for this one. So if we're looking at options like opt-in, opt-out, compulsory license, what is your kind of gut on this? Which way should we go?
So I would say copyright isn't an issue that the Ada Lovelace Institute has done a lot of research on. We've done some convenings, specifically with publishers, with academics, with rights holders, with some SMEs, not with big tech, so I can't kind of represent that perspective. But from the research, we've seen quite a bit of support for the opt-in mechanism. So this is where rights holders would consent to their work being used, both for training and inference. I think that distinction is really useful. Training is when general purpose AI models kind of have this vast amount of data to feed into the system to learn from. But we're seeing increasingly copyrighted data being used at the point of inference. So when you ask ChatGPT something, it might cite a copyrighted work in its response, which is really common with news publications. And often it's citing works from proprietary databases and generating summaries. But we're finding that the summaries often misattribute the source. The summaries often introduce factual error into the news and then attribute them to a real source, which can cause reputational damage. So it might say the BBC reported that blah, 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 and XYZ actually didn't happen. That's a hallucination in the model. And that also results in misinforming the public. So we think that rights holders need to have the opportunity to opt in both for their data being used at the point of training, but also at that point of inference. Can their data be used to kind of feed back that answer to people, and how? And this places the burden appropriately on big tech companies to kind of compensate rights holders for the use of their data. a framework should include lots of things, but we've thought through things kind of like licensing requirements, transparency obligations, which I think we'll talk about a bit more, a liability framework, so some kind of guidance on liability for AI-generated content that misattributes or misrepresents copyrighted works, and enforcement mechanisms.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have time to talk about transparency. I want to bring in the audience soon, because we are already over halfway through our panel today. Rishi, I'll just ask that same question to you. So if it's opt-in, opt-out, compulsory license, what do you think is a model that would work?
I mean, that was an excellent answer. I don't think I've got that much more to answer. I mean, I'd kind of challenge anyone to kind of build anything on what you just said, actually. But, well, if we... I guess the BFI does have a position on this, which is we have a position that's in favour of strengthening the copyright framework, for all the reasons you just kind of talked about there. And, I mean, if I can make devil's advocate for a little bit, let me do that. Try and make it a little bit more interesting than just saying the BFI's position, which is, well, a lot of these, whatever we do in legislation, a lot of these companies will be able to scrape from another territory, kind of whatever they want. So, which you kind of alluded to as well. So, you know, is this kind of, I'm not going to say rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Is it kind of a vanity exercise? I don't think so. I think that what you want to do, I remember I used to have an old lecturer say there's the rules of the game, then there's the play of the game. So rules of the game, I think everything that you agree with. What's the play of the game? The play of the game, in line with let's get engaged, is that whatever we do, we're going to need some form of transparency and some form of accountability in terms of the body you talked about. We're going to need that. So why don't we start working on that now? Unfortunately, people are working on that now. That's just diamond. We need to have those two things, regardless of what happens. A world in which you just don't know what's in anything anymore is just lunacy. We have to know what's in things. The other thing I would like to say is we've got to try and encourage experimentation, which is what Charismatic.ai are doing. You're doing with your workshops as well. So let's do that. Let's find a safe way to encourage experimentation. CoStar are doing a brilliant job of that as well. I have to speak up for CoStar at this point. Across all the labs, actually, it's five labs. The third thing we do is let's just live a little bit in the world where what's created from the cultural and creative industries is valuable. And let's actually explore what that value is. And maybe you don't have to wait for legislation to do that. Let's get on with that. And so anything which explores value and in a mature way, and I have to say as well, like even if I sit on the most neutral seat possible, when AI companies do things like, I've used was it Scarlett Johansson's voice? I've put the Ghibli thing. I'm kind of more neutral on the Ghibli thing than perhaps people might think, but I think putting it into your avatar, it's childish actually. So I think there needs to be a bit more maturity, and the maturity involves everything you just said, which is incredibly mature, and also saying, let's have some bedrocks, transparency, enforcement, the proper mature attempt to get deals, and some proper experimentation.
Yeah.
Make a quick comment on that. So one of the things that Rishi talks about with CoStar we're involved in, which is an initiative called ACCCCCCCT. Too many, I can't remember how many. But in essence, it's a model where blockchain technology is used to track IP and remunerate back to the creator or copyright holder, depending on your perspective. That to me makes sense. Both my parents are writers. I remember them holding out for the check from the publishers if it came once every 6 months. What in any sane world where is that okay? That you get your paycheck every 6 months? It's mad. That is not the right way to do. Something like blockchain, which is obviously built for a real-time environment, can start to speed up that transaction process, get the money back to the creators faster. That's what ACCT, as I understand it, is looking to do, is to create a model that can be fit for purpose. Because if we go back and we try and layer on the checks going to creators onto a generative AI model, it's going to break. The two speeds don't align. So you're dead right, Rishi. There's a lot of work going into that. That's what I would propose. But like I said at the beginning, this whole world is changing. And when I say changing, I mean from the moment of creation of the idea and how that happens and how it can go out across multiple platforms onto YouTube, through to the way that the money changes hands. And it's a very un-English thing to look at, but money let's start talking about money. Stop talking about copyright, because copyright is a filter through to money. If you start talking about money, you'll find out actually where the skeletons are and how we can build a model out of it. Copyright is a destination along that journey.
Okay, excellent. Jocelyn, before we go to the audience, it'd be good to hear from you. Any thoughts on actual harm so far? Like, are we seeing actual harm out there for creatives from AI?
Yeah, and also just to kind of respond to the blockchain thing too, because I've heard this being brought up a lot about blockchain being a way you can remunerate artists, and there have been experiments with this going on for years. And I had a conversation with an artist exactly about this the other day, and they were like, this doesn't work. We have looked into this. We can see that, you know, to actually have your rights reflected in a blockchain environment. Anyway, I'm going to leave that for there, but we can talk about that. As far as like harms to artists, obviously the thing is we're not in the room when a lot of these decisions are made. That said, there are a couple of places I'd signpost to. Equity are doing good research on this. Society of Authors, the Association of Illustrators as well. Generally, they're having reported from their members something like 50% are saying they suspect that they've lost work or that their income is lower than it was before. What I've seen with my own eyes from my work with agencies is definitely people are using things like 11 Labs more than using voiceover talent. I think voiceover talent is probably the most affected creative industry that I've seen and spoken to and are reporting what's happening. And then also there's something, I would sort of call it human washing, unless that's already a term, where you would get an agency that previously, and they've said this to me very openly, they say the quiet part out loud, where previously they would have illustrators work with each step of the iteration of a campaign or a piece of creative. Now what's much more frequent is they might work with Midjourney to get it to a certain point where it's pretty much where they want it, then they bring the human illustrator in for the last step, and then if anyone asks, they say, no, it's human, we made this with human. So I think there's sort of internal working cycles. We often don't have eyes on them, right? Because, we don't know what's going on in their buildings. But when we do commission these agencies, when we do work with them, we can start by asking questions about processes exactly like this, rather than kind of, putting our hands over our ears and saying, well, we really hope our agencies are using humans, and they say that they do, and we're not going to investigate too deeply. You have a responsibility, if you work with a creative agency, to know what their work process is. Ask the hard questions. You probably will be surprised by some of the answers. So that's a provocation I would give anyway.
Okay, excellent. Let's turn to already hands up, fantastic. What I want to do though, before we just have a free-for-all, I just want to say, let's not get too much into AI is terrible and the worst thing in the universe, or AI is amazing and I love it. We've had quite a nuanced discussion here, so it'd be good to kind of keep it in that kind of vein. We'll try this, and then we can just open it up to anyone if this doesn't work. But it would be great to hear a question for the panel from a creator or a small company, and your thoughts. Okay, yes.
So there's a couple of things in here. And I think first of all is, as a creator and as an indigenous man, there's a lot of artists that are not digital by themselves. And so there's an entire thing which we're talking right now in a very Western way of thinking about the art world and the creativity world that is actually forgetting about another side that exists, that is actually getting them worse than what we're talking about. That's the first part. The second part is we are currently doing something in which you have to express in your creativity, in your creative process, and document every moment in which you have used AI. So that by the time we publish a new piece or we create something, there's almost like an addendum to it that says, this is how this got used. And so by basically using AI and talking to it as a co-director, co-producer, whatever you want to call it, and then that way there's almost like an openness to what you've actually done. And for that same reason, it's like, I use ChatGPT, someone can actually go in and find the references that you've done on that side. So it kind of opens up and says, you have to be as open as you can, but that means you have to be open, and that's going to be one of the hardest issues that we see.
Any responses to these points? I think it's a good.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll pick up the indigenous side, actually, because I'm going to interpret that from a technology standpoint as the value of sovereign large language models and the value of how those systems are mono-Western culture broadly, and then DeepSeek comes in, but let's not get into that. But certainly the ability to reflect culture and individuals into that level is incredibly important. And there is a very strong agenda, which is vocalized and very public from the big tech companies saying, don't come here, guys. We already own this. No one can get into our space because it costs too much. And then DeepSeek comes in and challenges it. That's not true. So there is, and locally, MediaStream.ai is just down the road here. They built their own sovereign large language model themselves in Manchester, based on their own data. So this is possible. But it's like, goes back to what I said. It's the will to do something, and then understanding what that something is that reflects your work, who you are, and can build on it. It's not simple.
I would also just pick up on that. I mean, yeah, this is a point I've had reflected, that it almost feels intentional, that, you know, even if you're pretty plugged in, you're a digital creator, it's still very hard to understand how your work is being used, how it's being used to train models. If you're outside of that, what hope have you possibly got? You know, let's be real. So I think that's part of where this sense of this unhonest relationship, this sense of, you know, we are really taking artists seriously, but of course, how can they engage when they don't know the language too, or they don't know the terms too? I just agree, really.
Okay, do we have a question from a technologist? It'd be great to hear a technologist's input. Yes, okay. It'd be good to just get a bit of context of who you are or the kind of field you're in.
I'm a freelance VR developer, but I trained as an architect, so kind of got a foot in both camps in some ways, traditional and then new tech. This is a bit more like a philosophical angle, but say we get to, like, you know, higher levels, like closer to AGI eventually. What kind of is the difference between an AGI agent browsing the internet, you know, absorbing content, like you know, if someone says, could I illustrate a Studio Ghibli image, I probably do a bad job of it because I'm not an illustrator, but like, I know that I have it in my brain. What are kind of the differences between an AGI model having that in their brain and then us having that in their brain, and kind of where do you think, how do we navigate that? What we doomed?
If AGI happens within our lifetimes, we'll probably be dead anyways. Beyond that, yeah, it gets into fascinating questions though, about actually sort of, you know, whether you want to go into machine sentience or sort of machine rights, all of that kind of area. I don't think we're close enough there yet though, to kind of worry about that. But, you know, maybe coming soon.
Okay, very quickly. It's provoking the artist's question of the big philosophical questions. You mentioned it. What is art? What is self-expression? What's good? What's bad? There are some really big questions that are being asked right now. And when that hits, there are certain things that AI can't, in my world, in storytelling, it can't do. It can't do subtext in a story. It just can't do it. It's really bad at silences, at dramatic silences. It doesn't like a vacuum. It just fills it. Certain things that actually we haven't necessarily recognized in our own humanity are about to become recognised, and that, you know, it's a bit of a battle, but it's going to be interesting. More than that, no idea, because it hasn't happened yet.
Okay, and do we have maybe a question from a policymaker, somebody in the investment world? Yeah.
Yeah, I work for the European Institute of Technology and Innovation, and we think about this stuff a lot. We've just come back last week from the European EU intellectual property organisation. So talking about the idea of diversity and in input, and also talking about the rightful remuneration of the creator's work. And I've listened to the conversation, and I'm hearing a lot about US, and I'm just wondering, to what extent are you leaning into Europe as potential collaborators in building a system which recognises diversity and recognises the need for a sophisticated marketplace for intellectual property rights, not just an opt-out system? I know that Europe went in there a little early on that, but that's a real question.
Yeah, I can speak to this a bit. I think what we've seen from the UK government in the last year is like a real kind of alignment with a lot of what's happening in the US on AI policy more generally. So there have been like really strong deregulatory tendencies. We've seen shifts away from a UK AI bill, which was raised in July 2024. Still not seen a consultation on this bill. So I think you're pointing to a really strong kind of geopolitical trend that we're seeing. I think threats around kind of tariffs and trade are very real. And now we've seen the UK establish a £31 billion tech deal with the US. So I think, to be frank, the kind of EU AI Act, which was seen as like really strong protection, is something that the UK government is not particularly keen on being aligned with. And I think as a research institute, like, we are concerned to see the omnibus and what's happening in the EU now, which looks like a weakening now of EU protections, which used to be one of the kind of strongest protections that we saw around the world. So the US is having a really strong influence on the UK and more broadly. And I think that's just what's happening in the policy landscape.
And Nuala said it in much more appropriate terms, other than my analogy of Donald Trump and Keir Starmer on the phone together. But I take your point that you know, we do look at the US because it's so dominant in such a deep level of tiers that expand beyond AI. Could we do more with the EU? Yes. The first conversations I had with sovereign LLMs were in Sweden at a university in Umeå. That was 10 years ago. Yeah. And so there is movement. I mean, there is movement.
Movement in Europe, and it was 2 weeks ago, there was an act called the Compass Act, which recognises the culture of creative output is fundamental to infrastructure and goes into the idea of sovereign infrastructure. And I think it's important you frame the debate, but we should frame the debate as part of a cultural sovereignty push, because the right to be remunerated is also the right for your culture to be recognised and survive independently of, you know, what would be a universal framework of American publishers.
Yeah, and I think you're all probably here this morning, so you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Andy Burnham talked about creativity as infrastructure, yes, which leapt out. It's like, shit, that's different to the higher level, more entertaining things that we're looking at. That is a lot more solid.
I have to say, just on the cultural point, and we talked about Ghibli earlier, the Japanese response to that was really strong. Like there was a really strong, visceral reaction in the policy world in Japan over this American company taking the crown jewels of Japanese animation and repurposing it. It is a really important point. Maybe we'll have time for one more question, and just anyone who's got anything they want to say. Up at the back, you had your hand up. I'm going to do the daytime TV show thing and run up the audience, because otherwise we might actually hear up at the back.
Thank you. I've appreciated your reflections on opt-in, opt-out and licensing. I guess I'm curious about whether any of that really matters if we don't address text and data exemptions, and particularly if we look at what's happening in higher education with a funding crisis. There are many very lucrative partnerships being made, and I could obviously name names and won't do that, but it does strike me that it's a little bit relevant whether we opt in or opt out if there's still the rationale for mining based on research.
Any thoughts?
I mean, I can tackle that. I mean, we have the BFI is also an independent research organisation, so we receive funding from the Research Council, not a university, we receive funding from the Research Councils, and we have the National Archive for Film and Television as well. I think there is a really material difference. I think the exemptions in the past have worked. The text and data mining exemption works. It allows, and actually on the back of that exemption, there's also a host of sort of private deals that happen. So, for example, all of the major broadcasters also share content with the archive and with the BFI archive and the streamers as well. And actually I would say that both in law, in practice, and by kind of private agreement, the feeling of the need for an exemption has felt very enshrined. I don't, and we would want that to continue. So whatever, we certainly have feelings at the BFI about the strengths of the copyright framework, but this exemption we think is really important. So I think we should, And you know, a really good litmus test is it a problem? Is the exception really a problem when actually in practice right now, are we seeing problems develop as AI goes? One or two problems around a bit more fear about whether the exemption is a backdoor to something accidentally happening and some kind of data leaking into a model. But generally speaking, I think my feeling is it has worked, it's continuing to work, and our vision is one where it does continue to work, having an exemption.
Okay, fantastic. Let's move towards the end of the discussion now, and it'd be good to hear, I'll ask you those three, I'll put those 3 points. Oh, there we go. Hey. There we go. Boom. Yeah, we're coming towards the end of the discussion now. Let's just go through the 3 points I made at the start again, where you raised your hands. Let's see if there's been any change. It was mostly around only explicit opt-in is acceptable at the start of this discussion. So, has anyone changed their mind? And now they think training on their work is without permission is fine, as long as they can opt out. Nobody thinks that's a good idea. Sorry, Sam Alton. Only explicit opt-in is acceptable. And it depends on pay, transparency, and control. I think there's been a little bit of a shift towards that one there, so that's quite an interesting outcome of today. So to round off then, hello, right. To round off then, I'm going to ask you for a one-sentence answer to an individual thing. So Guy, let's go to you first. Tell me one thing AI developers must do. Answer it however you want.
They should buy the AI Filmmaker's Handbook by Alan Gadney. Available at cineprolab.com. I'll leave it there.
Nice. Jocelyn, Nuala, if you pass the mic to Jocelyn, thanks. One thing creatives must do now.
I would say unravel the idea that learning about AI means advocating or using AI. You can learn about nuclear power and not love nuclear power. So, please don't put your head in the sand. If you can experiment in a way which is like a sandbox within your values, maybe an open source tool that you've put just on your laptop so you're not sending your data out, I really encourage you to experiment, learn with your own eyes, sort of the failure points, the biases, all of this. But please do learn. Please don't see it like engaging with AI is inevitable championing of it, but do find ways to learn that you find interesting, that you find sustainable.
Okay, Nuala, one thing government must not get wrong.
I think there's a piece about who is brought into the room for a lot of these conversations. It's actually really interesting to hear you say that in the initial kind of consultation, smaller firms weren't brought into that conversation, and you are in that now. So I think making sure that you are bringing the right people into the room so that it's not just kind of the big tech lobby that's shaping how the policy turns out.
Okay, and Rishi, one thing funders or institutions must build.
I think ways of I think they should all need to experiment safely, but actually it's ways of doing that and actually sharing the bravery to share the results of that experimentation in public. So it's about reach and making sure that their experimentation has reach.
Fantastic. Well, I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and it's opened my mind to slightly different perspectives. And if you came in the room with a really anti-AI, I hate this thing, it must die, kill it with fire, maybe you feel a little bit different now. If you don't, well, hey, that's just the way we've got to live. But, well, thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to Guy, Jocelyn, Nuala, and Rishi, and thank you to you.